Special thank you to our sponsor, iGenX. iGenX isn't just a small business. It's a powerhouse ally ready to tackle your agency's toughest tech challenges head on. Specializing in low-code, no-code solutions, advanced analytics, and project management, iGenX is your go-to partner for both federal and commercial projects. But what sets iGenX apart? As a Salesforce Summit-level partner, the company brings unparalleled expertise across the entire Salesforce ecosystem. From MuleSoft and Einstein and Tableau, the expert teams at iGenX don't just build solutions, they engineer them, crafting robust data pipelines and creating stunning visualizations that drive real results. At iGenX, success isn't just a goal, it's a promise. The team is dedicated to delivering measurable benefits that transform your operations. Ready to partner with iGenX? Contact the team at info@igenx.com, spelled info@eigenx.com.
They finally did it. My team came in and we had a meeting and they said, we did it. We did a procurement for IT services in just 30 days. And I was strict. I said, when I say this, I mean 30 days from concept to award. That's what I mean by 30 days. And they said, okay, we did it in 30 days. And I immediately said, why does it have to take 30 days? Why can't you do it faster?
Welcome to GovCom Unfiltered, where your journey through the labyrinth of federal contracting begins. I'm Alexa Choi, your guide and host on this epic adventure. Here, we dive deep into the heart of government contracting, shedding light on the heroic tales of those who navigate its complex terrain. Our mission? To bring you closer to the action, revealing the critical steps, triumphant victories, and occasional pitfalls that our intrepid adventurers face. Your journey into the world of government contracting starts now, and we could not be happier to have you with us. Let's embark on this adventure together.
Thank you for tuning in to GovCom Unfiltered. I'm Alexa, the Chief Operating Officer of G2X, and today we are talking with Mark Schwartz. And I've been waiting months for this. And in fact, when I decided to launch a podcast, he was on my list from the beginning. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Please tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into the questions.
Sure. I am what they call an enterprise strategist at Amazon Web Services, AWS. The title doesn't really mean anything. I'll tell you what it means. I'm part of a team of about 15 or so former CXOs of large organizations in all different industries and both commercial sector and public sector. And we spend our time working with senior leaders of organizations on the things that are unexpectedly hard in digital transformation. So usually the non-technical things like cultural change and organizational structure and governance models and investment strategies, business cases, busting through bureaucracy, my favorite topic, change leadership, things like that. So we do a lot of speaking as well and a lot of writing. I've now published 5 books on IT leadership and digital transformation, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about them.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Yeah, so question number 1 is really going to spill the beans on who you are and your background. If people don't already know, because I think you're a little bit of a celebrity to me, and I think people that were in your orbit at the time, you're probably a celebrity to them as well. But tell us about your journey and spend a little bit of time on your foray as a CIO and how you were a little bit famous, or as we like to say, infamous, for being a disruptor in the space.
Yeah, disruptor means troublemaker, I guess.
It does.
Yeah. So I, at some point, became the CIO of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in the Department of Homeland Security. I think that was sort of an accident. That was my only public sector experience in my career. Before that, I was CIO of a company in San Francisco. I was CEO of a small software company. And I think what started the government thing is I was reading an article about just how messed up IT was in government agencies. And being the kind of person that I am, I immediately said, oh, easy, I can fix that, So I did. I'm happy to tell you that it's all fixed. Government
It's all
IT,
fixed. All of it.
like clockwork, no problem. I went in and did that. And what I discovered, among other things, was that our way of doing things in IT was this. I know this is not going to surprise you. It was a little slow. We found that our average time between releases of each software system, just for one system, just to do an update to it, 18 months was the average. And if you think about that, this is immigration, right? The hottest political, hot potato, the football that's being tossed back and forth between the parties, whatever. It's not something that stays still very long. And so in order to become more responsive to changes in immigration, whether they came from the Hill or came from the president or anyone else, we were going to have to find a way to be faster. And everything in government fights that. So we had to disrupt, I guess. The way you put it is pretty good. We had to do a little bit of disruption. I think there was a second problem when I joined also that needed to be fixed, and it turned out the general approach to fixing both problems was the same. The second problem was that we had a big, well-known disaster of an IT program that had spent a lot of money and gotten nothing for it. And we were maybe one of the more extreme examples in government, but we certainly weren't the only ones. Even in DHS, it was just one after another. Projects were running way behind schedule, way over budget, or just not finishing or whatever. And it was strange or provocative that DHS had a very strict oversight policy. We had our MD 102, Management Directive 102, that gave very detailed instructions on how every IT program should be run. And it existed because of the risk of projects not being successful. And so it imposed this very heavy-duty oversight approach to try to make sure every project was successful. And if you looked at the actual results, every project was unsuccessful, more or less. Small exaggeration, maybe, but it just didn't add up. So we had to fix that as well and be more responsive to changes in immigration.
Right. So whenever I talk about, your impact, which I do, because for me on the contractor side, it was one of the more impactful CIOs I've ever seen. So the TLDR version, Too Long Didn't Read, got a quick handle on what the problems were, threw out the SDLC, fired the big incumbent, recompeted the contract small business, and had the small businesses competing for green builds to get the software out faster. So that's kind of like the elevator pitch of your story that I use.
That's really good. I want to use that. Yeah. We didn't throw out the SELC exactly, because that would have gotten me in big trouble. We were creative with it, let's say. I do attribute a lot of the problems to that SELC and the way it was set up. One way to measure the success of what we did is if you think about that starting point of the 18-month release cycle. By the time I left, for many of our major systems, we changed it from one release every 18 months to about 3 releases every day. So,
wow.
Yeah. So that's what we were shooting for. We were very single-minded about speed, speed, speed. We also changed our contracting approaches. This relates to something you said before. It had been taking us up to 3 years to complete each contract for IT services.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That causes a lot of other problems downstream. I think, if a contractor knew that it was going to take us 3 years to replace them, they didn't necessarily have a strong incentive to perform really well.
Right.
So I also set a crazy goal of getting it down from 3 years to 30 days. And yeah, you can imagine how horrible it is to work for me, right?
Contracting people were like, what?
Yeah. And there's actually a funny story connected with that they finally did it. My team came in and we had a meeting and they said, we did it. We did a procurement for IT services in just 30 days. And I was strict. I said, when I say this, I mean 30 days from concept to award. That's what I mean by 30 days. And they said, okay, we did it in 30 days. And I immediately said, why does it have to take 30 days? Why can't you do it faster? And they all started laughing, just as you did. They all started laughing and they said, we knew you were going to ask that. So we brought a presentation on why it can't be done faster than 30 days. So, talk about single-minded focus, which I think helps a lot. We could frame everything in terms of speed. We could measure our speed. And everybody in the organization knew that's what we were trying to do, speed somehow. The contractors knew it too. And that meant we were talking on the same level, let's say.
Wow. This might be the first program I've ever heard describe their single-minded goal of speed,
Yes.
especially on the government side, because
Yes.
they're
And,
not.
so I've found that speed is the right proxy for a lot of other goals, right? If you can get speed, you can do a lot of things. So, for example, let's take security. A lot of people think security is opposed to speed.
Right.
But once we figured out how to do speed, we could do, for example, automated security regression tests, and we could run them every time any developer made any change to any code. And since we were doing infrastructure as code, that included infrastructure. So now you go from a certification and accreditation program that happens like once and maybe is reviewed every 2 or 3 years. Well, now every time anybody makes a change, we're reassessing our security posture. So speed turned out to be a pretty good proxy for what we could do with security. There's a lot more to it, of course. That's just an example. But speed, as I said, was another way to get better control over our contractors because they knew we could recompete the contract in 30 days. We would have no compunction to do so if their performance wasn't satisfactory. Most of our contractors were had the best of all will and intentions. I'm not saying they were necessarily a problem, but it sort of changes the game.
Right.
If we could, let's say, get a program kicked off really quickly, do security clearances quickly and notice to proceed and all of that, then that meant that contractors who had people ready to work on our program, they wouldn't be sitting on the shelf forever. So they could give us maybe the people who are best suited to what we wanted to do. So speed changes so many things. With speed, we could get feedback from users more quickly. We could try experiment. There's just so much you can do if you can get speed.
So that is a fascinating concept of which I hadn't considered before, like picking one thing, aligning to it with a singular focus, and then backing into other things from it. Let me ask you a question that wasn't on the list, sorry in advance. How did you back into quality in this case? Like, how did you ensure quality if you were myopically focused on speed?
Yeah, interesting question. I love to talk about it actually when I'm meeting with customers because there's another area where people think the two are opposed, that if you're moving quickly, you can't be getting quality.
Exactly.
Quite the opposite.
Software developers love to tell you that, by the way. They're like, you can have it fast or you can have it good, but you can't have both.
Yeah, and I was the kind of person who would say, yeah, I want both. Especially if it was a contractor, I'd say, yeah, I want both. And if you can't give it to me, I'll find somebody else.
You can see why now he didn't make a lot of friends on the contract.
Yes, troublemaker. I could tell this story from a lot of different angles, but basically, if you're doing things right, quality and speed come together. The more speed, the more quality. And the reason, first of all, look at the reason why people think they're opposed. They're opposed if you think of speed meaning tell people to work faster. Well, if you tell them to work faster, they're going to make mistakes and quality is going to go down. I never want people to work faster. What I want is I want to take waste out of the process for them so that they work at the same speed, but things get done much quicker. So, for example, in this complicated procurement process that was taking us 3 years, there was one piece of paper that took forever to prepare because it had to be signed off on by 7 different people. And those 7 people were senior people in the agency, so they didn't have any free time. And they each had, an SLA you can take up to a week before you sign this. And of course, that meant it sat on their desk for a week and, they never looked at it. And, the solution to getting it done faster wasn't to tell my people, write that document faster. The solution was to say, why do we need 7 people to sign off on this? And why
Yeah.
those people?
Right.
And is there another solution? Could we have like a generic template, and as long as we follow the template, they agree that they're going to sign off on it, so they don't have to read it. And why are we actually giving them a week when it only takes 10 minutes? Could we
Yeah.
reduce the number of people who sign? Could we have them look at it in parallel? What can we do that's going to speed it up? And there are a lot of answers because there's a lot of waste in the process. So when it comes to quality of software code, the DevOps community has figured this out. This is a solved problem in many ways. The software developers should be writing automated tests to test their code. Those automated tests should become part of a regression test suite that's fully automated. Nothing should be even able to be deployed unless it has passed all of the quality tests. In parallel with that, you might do some experimental testing. You might have some people fiddling with the system trying to break it. We did automated security tests and automated performance tests, and especially Section 508, we were able to automate quite a lot. So there are lots of tricks you can use to speed things up that actually increase quality rather than decrease it. And you can do much more testing and much more quality control because you're fast at it.
So it's more of a misconception, especially now with AI, right? Because when you think about the acquisition process and some of those repeatable processes, RPA was like a big term, probably starting when you were there, and it's kind of been moved out for this whole AI ML concept, which, the government loves their buzzwords. That's what's hot right now. So what AI has done is really proven that you can move faster with less people and upskill the people you have to do different things and to move the whole thing faster, right?
Yeah. At least the early results on generative AI seem to indicate that, for example, coders can code more quickly with the help of the generative AI assistant. But not only that, back to the previous point, their code is higher quality and more secure because the generative AI is looking for security problems and making suggestions and so on. So you can get speed and also get quality, and that's the goal. One takeaway that I had not from my time in the government, but from my time after the government is, everybody in the government has this inferiority complex, like we can't do it as well as the private sector or something like that.
Right.
And my learning is, you'd be surprised, the private sector can be pretty screwed up too. And usually what makes the difference in my experience usually is the size of the organization. Big organizations have problems. And in many ways, it's predictable problems. I can see the same sorts of issues arise at lots of different big organizations. The government happens to be exceptionally good at getting in its own way, but it's not qualitatively different. A lot of the same issues. So right now, Gen AI is the big thing.
Right.
It's not just in government. And there's a lot of conversation about it that arguably, a few years from now, we'll look back and say, well, that wasn't really the right conversation to have. Because that's the way the future unrolls. You don't really know what's going to be important. But right now, this is the thing to talk about because it's the thing that's new and probably has very deep implications for all of us.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think at this juncture right now, we don't even know, right? All of the implications it will have down the road.
Federal proposals, your voice, less time, exceptional results. Voltron gives you the power of custom language models to reduce proposal development costs by 54% and start to finish submission time by 63%. Voltron is the only AI platform that synthesizes the valuable business development and capture information you obtain to write high-quality, compliant proposal content specific to your company in each solicitation. Stop throwing it over the fence. Schedule a demo today at vultron.ai.
So I'm going to skip past a couple of these questions because we talked about them, but the one question I'm really curious about your take on is, what do you think about some of the presidential initiatives for AI, and particularly the CDAO role, the chief, AI officer. And do you think that that role could be filled by maybe the chief data officer or the CIO or the CISO or any other C-suite in the government? And kind of like, what is your hot take on all that?
Well, first of all, every organization is different, and the org structure that's going to work in one organization is not necessarily the one that's going to work in others. So I would never say it's a bad idea to have a CDAO or anything else. My tendency, though, is not to create silos, not to break things into pieces. We like cross-functional stuff these days. We want to put as many things together as we can, not separate them. And so in general, I would look twice at something like that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily going to cause problems, but generally, I would like to have cross-functional shared incentives and shared motivations. So in answer to your question, I think, yes, in many cases, it could be put under the CIO. And there are reasons why it could make sense to do that. I think there are reasons, historical reasons, why it has been viewed as important to separate certain things out from the CIO role, chief digital officer, chief data officer, CDAO, and so on. And I think part of it is CIOs were often viewed as not having the skills for those things. And to me, the right solution is get CIOs who have those skills. Things have changed a lot, and the skill set that's needed is different than it was before.
Right.
And CIOs can learn new tricks, and you can also, you're going to be recruiting a whole new gang of people over time. So let's get people in the CIO role who cross all of those boundaries. But instead, and this is happening in the private sector as well, sometimes the move is to say, okay, CIOs should continue doing what we think they're best at, which is back office systems, ERP systems, accounting systems, that kind of thing. And if we're going to do something digital, we need a digital person. And if we're going to do something in AI, we need an AI person.
Right. So I think what I hear you saying is that a utility player at the top, whatever title that is going to feel most comfortable playing their role because this will evolve over time. Is that what I'm hearing you say, kind of?
Yeah, I am. I go even maybe beyond that. I think we should focus a lot more on hiring utility players, generalists, let's say.
Yeah, generalists.
Rather than people who have really strong skills in one particular functional area. I think that's a general trend across industry and government. Because when you build a cross-functional team, you don't want to take this, sort of big waterfall organization and just compress it into a smaller team. You don't want to, when you have a DevOps team or an Agile team or something, it needs to have skills in software development and testing and infrastructure and security and so on. But that doesn't mean that one person on the team is the programmer, one person on the team is the infrastructure. What you really want, we talk about T-shaped people. So people who are generalists and go across all the categories and maybe go especially deep in one area.
Right.
But if you're trying to make a cross-functional team, generalists really help it a lot. I think if you're trying to be agile, having generalists helps a lot because then they can fill whatever gaps you need. That's agile, depending on how things progress. I think people who have a broad range of skills can be more creative in solving problems, et cetera. So I would actually say this is an emerging principle, especially in technology, HR.
Right. Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the T-shaped individual. Wow. I haven't heard that in a while. I used to put that in a lot of Agile proposals because it makes sense, actually. Right.
Yeah, I mean, agile is one of those words that tends to get misused, or people look for a formula for it. So maybe they think that if you do daily stand-ups and sprints, then you're agile. But I have always tried to look much deeper than that. You're agile if you're agile,
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's going to make you the most agile? It's not necessarily daily stand-ups or whatever. it might have to do with what kind of people you're hiring, how you're forming your teams, and a lot of other things.
Yep. I actually think it's another one of those Princess Bride moments where it's like, I don't think that term means what you think it means.
Yeah.
You keep using that word, and there's so many people do that. And I'm always like, I don't know. Okay, but I remember actually going back to your origin story in the government space. The project that you're most famous for was very agile. It was, and like you said, you sort of ignited CI/CD, which is what you were saying, constant delivery, CI/CD.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that was what you kind of were the genesis of that in USCIS, in that big, by the way, anybody listening to this, it wasn't like a small program. It was a massive program.
Yeah. Actually, there's a slightly less well-known one, our verification modernization program that dealt with E-Verify. And actually that was the one where I did the experiments, and then we rolled them into the big transformation program. Yeah, so both of those were a big change. And I also want to say I was sort of the force that drove things, but my team did amazing stuff, and went from being unfamiliar with these things to becoming evangelists in many cases. And I'm very excited that a lot of the people who used to work for me have now taken leadership roles across the government as CIOs of other agencies and so on. So that's part of what I'm proud of.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny that you say that. I remember meeting you in your office when you were in that role. And that's part of what I think made you such a strong leader, was that, you weren't just all about me, but you talked about your team even at that point, and you introduced them and you walked us around and you were like, this guy does this and this guy does that. But, it's easy to get tied up in like, these are my results, this is what I did. But really, ultimately, there's no way that one person can have any kind of impact like you did by yourself.
Yeah, I take credit for being a troublemaker. Everybody else did all the other stuff.
Mark, actually, that leads into my next question. This is a true GovCom Unfiltered question. Were you like not afraid to get fired? Like, were you just like, I'm here, we're gonna do this thing, and we're gonna make a big change?
Yeah, I didn't want to be fired, but let's say my risk profile was different from a lot of other people. I was coming from pretty good private sector roles. I was pretty confident that I could find another one if I needed to. I basically said to my manager when I first entered government something along the lines of, I know it's really hard to fire people. If you just tell me you don't want me around anymore, I'll leave. Don't worry about it. I won't make you fire me. So yeah, I think that was a very powerful strength, in the sense that I could absorb a lot of the risk for my people. I could say to them, do the right thing, and blame it on me if somebody says you can't do that. I'm fine with that.
And that goes back to, again, being a strong leader, right? Being able to be that buffer. And I think in particularly that role at that time, that was what was needed. I guess I have another question that was on the list. Why did you leave us? We need you.
Yeah, it maybe relates to that. So first of all, I got more and more emotionally committed to the role, and I wouldn't have wanted to be fired more and more, especially as we were succeeding on a lot of things. I found government work to be extremely rewarding. I loved it. And I loved the people I was working with. So all of those were positives. When I came in, I had a lot of energy and resilience, and I could laugh off a lot of things. And I found that after 6 or 7 years, I wasn't laughing as much. I was getting pissed off, and so I thought, time to move on to something else. Maybe time to save a little money for retirement and then come back to government. Maybe time to let.
Wait. Do I hear we have a chance?
What'd you say?
Do we have a chance to recruit you back?
Yeah, but not now. I've told that to a lot of people. I was on the Biden transition team. I always forget to mention that to people because, it was a short volunteer thing.
Right.
But I've stayed very connected with the government. So yes, I love it. In my current role, I'm about 70% commercial sector, 30% public sector. So I'm still involved in government stuff. And interestingly, it includes foreign governments as well, and state and local. So I'm getting all kinds of interesting government experience, even while I'm doing what I'm doing now. So when I started to look around to see if there was something else I wanted to do outside of the government, the right opportunity just immediately showed up,
Right.
by coincidence, really. And so I took that, but I've tried to stay connected to the government. And I would love to go back at some point.
Wonderful. Well, this gives me hope, first of all. Second of all, I'm gonna start sending you CIO roles. No, just kidding. So I really wanted to pivot into talking about your latest book because you were so kind to give me an advanced copy, and I read it, I think, in a weekend. For nonfiction, that is saying something. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your latest book. And for those listening, literally, Mark released a book called Adaptive Ethics for Digital Transformation, like almost the same month that ChatGPT came out. So I was like, do you know something we don't know, Mark? Like, how did you do that? How did you time that so perfectly?
Yeah, or maybe timed it very poorly, because because after that day, everybody was talking about AI, specifically AI ethics, and what does generative AI mean for responsible behavior and all of that.
Right.
And I didn't, go deeply into that specific area in the book, which if I wrote it today, I certainly would. I do talk about AI and AI ethics in the book, but its focus is much broader.
It is.
It is, right? And I found it the hardest book to write. And to me, that's appealing. I like really hard things. I like to solve hard problems. And I think the problem here is that leaders, I'm writing for executives generally, executives are not good at thinking about ethical issues. And I think that's predictable because nobody teaches them how to think about ethical issues. And it's just not something that comes up a lot. And so I feel it right now, everybody's worried about responsible AI and all of that, and they're not too sure what they need to do. And, I think that's because executives aren't really taught how to frame ethical questions.
Right.
So I don't mean to say they're unethical. I mean, they don't know how to frame a question and debate it and think about it and make decisions.
Right.
In MBA programs, I was in one, there tends to be an ethics course because
business ethics.
You have to have an ethics course. But if you look at those courses, it's a combination of confusing what's ethical with what's legal. And right. And one of the most important points in my book, I think, is that we're talking two very different things.
Yeah.
And the second thing that happens, since business schools tend to use case studies, is they'll look at a case, Enron or something, and they'll discuss it. And that's it. What do you walk away with?
You're like, wait a second, what good or bad? What should they have done? What should they have done?
And everybody agrees it's bad, probably. Most people agree it's bad, but what does that mean for how you should behave in the future?
Right.
If the same issues came up for you that came up for Enron, then maybe you'd make a different decision than they did. But how do you face new things like artificial intelligence and whatever?
Right.
So I thought there should be a book on this subject. I also notice when people talk about ethics, responsible AI, let's say, often the guidance that they're giving is not executable or is very vague. So I hear a lot of people saying, you have to think about bias.
Right.
Okay, I'm thinking about bias. What does that mean? What should I do about it?
Yeah. So I'm thinking about it. So what are the next steps? Yeah.
Right. When you're using AI, you have to think about bias, or you have to think about privacy. Well, okay, so what?
Yeah.
Many people, especially in Western cultures, have the idea that ethics is about a rule book. The 10 commandments. These are the 10 things you shouldn't do, or whatever. And if you look at a field like AI, the rules aren't there. You know, so executives are familiar with the idea of compliance. They know what it means to, you know, have to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley or something. And the mental model that they have of ethics is there's a code of ethics somewhere out there, and I should do what it says. In other words, comply with it. But the problem is there isn't. There really isn't. You know, there's guidance like think about bias. And it's not that clear. It would make our lives much easier as executives if somebody gave us the rule book and we just had to follow it. Turns out, in my opinion at least, that you have to make hard decisions when it comes to ethics. And there isn't a rule book to follow. So there are different ways of thinking about ethics that are less about following a rule book. Technically, following the rule book is sort of the deontological approach. There's a consequentialist approach, which doesn't work very well either. And then there's what's called virtue ethics, which is more likely to work for you. That's one of the things I talk about in the book. But I did say this is especially a problem in Western cultures, because virtue ethics is kind of the natural approach in certain other cultures. So, for example, Confucian ethics are essentially virtue ethics. It's about what does it mean to be a good person, as opposed to, in this situation, what's the rule? I think that sort of approach, the question, you know, what does it mean to be a good person or a good company, or what's your ethical position going to be? That's much more fruitful for making good decisions now than trying to find a rule book that doesn't exist.
Right. Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I just sort of like had a panic moment because I looked at the time and I was like, oh my gosh, we gotta get going. But really quick before we hop off the subject of that book, I have to say that if you haven't read it and you're listening to this, please at least check it out on Amazon. It has a 5-star review. All reviews are 5 stars. It was so great. And I really enjoyed it. It was funny, it was witty, and it was really nerdy. And it was just all of those things mixed together into a perfect storm. I did want to say that you have a bunch of other books like you'd mentioned. I think you said you have 5. So A Seat at the Table is one that I think is another, it's like mandatory reading for CEOs, I think. There's a couple other ones. What were the other ones? A Seat at the Table.
Well, my favorite is the book about bureaucracy.
Oh,
called The Delicate Art of Bureaucracy, Digital Transformation with the Monkey, the Razor, and the Sumo Wrestler. It's based on my deep experience dealing with bureaucracy. And I know you're not going to believe me, but it actually takes a nuanced approach to bureaucracy and what it is and how to deal with it, opposed to the usual approach of my hair is on fire, I can't stand this anymore, you know, get me away from the bureaucracy.
I love it. I don't think I've read that book. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna buy it after this conversation.
It will make you laugh, I promise. Having been anywhere near the government, this book will make you laugh.
All right, I love it. I love the title. At least it's fire. Okay, so we're gonna quickly move into the last 2 questions. The first one is, you know, if there's probably a lot of people, some of the leaders that worked with you and other people who know who you are, that watch your journey and they're inspired by you. What would be 2 pieces of advice you would give them for being successful?
I found what I learned from other people in the government, I find government employees are incredibly resilient. Like they just get dumped on all the time and they just keep going. Like, this is just, part of my job. People in the private sector don't tend to be as resilient. And I think that resilience is really important for getting things done in the government. I sometimes say that, in my government career, I spent years banging my head against the wall, and then finally the wall started to move a little bit, and that's what we called success. But that's kind of what it takes. I see it as a matter of integrity. You just have to do the right thing. You just have to keep trying to do the right thing and figure out how to make it work. Second thing is learn and be curious is an Amazon principle. And I think it's really important for everybody. You're a much stronger leader if you're curious and you ask questions and you try to learn new things. I was always stupefied that in the government, I had to explain to people why it's a good idea to be agile. I mean, there's literature out there. You could just read a book, go to a conference or something. It's out there. Why aren't you studying up on these things? My latest thing that I've been studying up on is quantum computing. Right? And I just was looking at it and I thought, Oh, this is interesting. I wonder how this works. And so I've been having a lot of fun looking into that lately. And I think that attitude of constant learning is a really good thing for a leader.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In quantum computing, you didn't pick something like, underwater basket weaving. You had to go straight to quantum computing.
Oh, hard stuff. I love hard stuff.
Of course you did, Mark. Oh, all right. So our last question is, what is your particular superpower and how did you know that that was your superpower?
I had a discussion with the head of quantum computing at AWS, and it turned out we both have master's degrees in philosophy. And so we were
Wow.
talking about like, how does that make you a better leader, that you have a master's degree in philosophy? And I think for me, it's given me the ability to keep reframing questions or keep reframing problems until they become solvable. So especially with bureaucracy, people tend to come at a problem and say, whoops, can't solve it. I'm going to shrug my shoulders. And I think one thing that I hope I'm good at, that I think I'm good at, is that's never the right answer. The right answer is how can we change what the problem is until there is actually an answer? You got to keep trying different ways of framing the problem until you find one that actually is amenable to an answer. And that's what I try to do.
Right, right. Wonderful. It's funny that you bring up this because I find a lot of folks in the IT space that have non-IT degrees. And there's a book that
Yes.
was written called Fuzzy and the Techie. I don't know if you know that book.
Yeah.
It's written by Stanford grads that, they all had degrees in English, but they're all in IT roles, and there's a lot of reasons why that happens. But the fact that he's the lead of quantum computing for AWS, you're doing what you're doing, and you guys both have master's degrees in philosophy is a fascinating thing to have in common.
Yeah, it is. And it's not obvious how it connects with leading an organization, but I think it's part of that background that I bring, that he brings, and that changes the way you approach leading an organization.
Wow. So super PPS question. Last one's, I promise. We could probably talk forever, but last question. When it comes back to ethics and your degree in ethics, and I guess philosophy, not ethics, do you see that as AI kind of moves forward in quantum computing and all of the whatever that entails, do you see this conversation becoming more important?
Yes, and good things are happening. It might not be obvious, but a lot of these things require conversation. So for example, yes, you shouldn't be biased. Okay, what does bias mean exactly?
Yeah.
And it turns out there are different ways to define bias, and they lead to different results. There's a book I recommend, The Ethical Algorithm by Michael Kearns, which presents sort of the mathematics of it, how different definitions of bias lead you to different approaches. But anyway, the point that I'm getting at is these are things that people actually have to talk about because it's not obvious what the right solution is. And I think that's exactly what's happening. We're forcing these issues out. If you're going to train AI based on what people do, well, people have bias, and right. So if you discover the bias in the AI, that leads you to the question of where's the bias in the people? Where's that bias coming from? What can you do about it? That kind of thing. So I think we're actually moving in a very positive direction in that sense. The things that are happening in technology today are forcing us to deal with some of these issues that we really need to deal with.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Mark. And I will catch everybody on the next episode of GovCom Unfiltered. Really appreciate your time, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
As we draw the curtain on today's chapter of GovCom Unfiltered, I want to thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey through the intricate world of federal contracting. I'm Alexa Choi, and it's been an honor to navigate these stories of courage, innovation, and resilience with you. Until we meet again, keep pushing boundaries, exploring new horizons, and making your mark in the government contracting universe. Farewell for now, but not forever. Stay tuned for more adventures that await in the next episode of GovCom Unfiltered. Safe travels on your path to greatness, and remember, we are all on this journey together.